freedom. Freedom. Now, this is something that in many Western countries we're brought up to believe that that is the most important value in the world, and we should protect it at all costs. And many people who have never been to China believe that Chinese people have very little of it. And admittedly, I also believed that before I came here. Now, my perspective after living here for 2.5 years has somewhat changed, and that's what we're gonna have a little coffee and chat about in today's video. So make sure you stick around, because I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Welcome back to the Barrett channel today for a brand new video. Now on this channel, me and my dad, we do a bunch of different videos surrounding the China topic. We go into factories, we do opinion pieces about society, and we show the days in the lives of normal, typical Chinese people. So if you're into that, subscribe, don't miss out. Now, freedom, what does that really mean though? What does it really mean? You know, we can look at it from a lot of different angles. It's very subjective as to what this actually is. I'm going to do my best to try and analyze this topic from a Western point of view and from a Chinese point of view. I'm going to play devil's advocate in some places. Whatever I say is sort of my own views. I've written some notes down that I'm going to be referring to, because this is a very important topic that needs discussing, and I don't want to sort of say anything that I don't really mean. So, freedom is an extremely broad term which can be perceived in so many different ways depending on your cultural upbringing. And I think there is so much nuance to this word that won't fully be understood unless you have been an international citizen. Now, I'm not saying I'm the most traveled person in the world, but I think it's been a great experience for me coming to China, because it's so polar opposite to what I'm used to being brought up in the UK. So I've kind of got at least somewhat of an idea of what it's like both sides. Many people in Western countries perceive freedom to be the right to act, think and speak however they want without restraint, whether that is to hold a gun in America per se, or whether that is to speak out and criticize the government publicly and not be sort of restrained for it. Therefore, the idea to them that you cannot hold a gun and you cannot publicly criticize the government inside of China, to them, to somebody who's never traveled here, that may seem like the citizens have no freedom at all. It's really not as simple as that. In the UK, where I grew up, sure, I can go online and publicly criticize Boris Johnson, which is our Prime Minister at the moment, as much as I want, and I'm not going to get any backlash in terms of the law. However, the monopolistic companies like Twitter, Facebook, and these other social media companies in the West have become such monopolies, so they hold so much power, even more in some cases than the government do when it comes to these rights, these human rights of freedom of speech and expression. During the Donald Trump days, you know, he would use Twitter as his main avenue of communicating his message to his country, right? And Twitter had the power to silence him off social media. Now, that's just how colossal these corporations have gotten. That was his main avenue of communicating, and a private company had the ability to silence the most powerful person in their country. How insane is that? Just take a minute to let that sink in. Does that mean that the President of the United States didn't even have that right to freedom of expression? I'll let you make your own mind up. Let me know down in the comments. American politician Jim Banks just got suspended off Twitter the other day for dead naming somebody. Now, dead naming, if you don't know, that is calling somebody who is transgender by their birth name or sex. You can get banned off these social media sites by doing something as simple as that. And that, again, limits your ability to express yourself freely online. Now, do you think that's justified? Do you think that's reasonable? Or do you think these social media giants should also have to comply with the free speech laws? But that would go against, you know, these private companies actually being private companies and being able to police themselves. So it's a real complicated, nuanced problem that they've got. Nowadays in Western countries, there are so many of these woke social rules that you have to abide by. Otherwise, you can get cancelled from your job, from your TV station, you know, cancelled off of social media for saying something like this, even when it's not by law. Now, I'm not advocating this, but I could go onto Chinese social media and dead name as many people as I wanted to. Obviously, I wouldn't do that, but it's just an area where actually China does have that freedom of expression, which is not in the West now, which is a really strange time. It is a strange time. I don't know whether we're going to look back on in 10 years' time and think, wow, we're actually cancelling people for saying, you know, these kinds of things. But it's become sort of like the social justice war. And it's kind of like people want to earn social points by being a part of this team and ostracizing the other team for saying something that they don't agree with. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for freedom of expression, but I think if the social media companies, now that they're as big as they are, if they don't have to abide by those same rules, then I think freedom of expression is almost just a fallacy. And you could argue that obviously in real life I can say whatever I want, but now these social media platforms have gotten so big that that's the only way you can really get your message out to millions of people. And if they want to cancel you for saying X, Y, and Z things, then is that really the ability to express yourself freely? I don't know if it is. In China, obviously, no, you can't go out on the streets and publicly criticize the government. Neither can you do that on social media. It definitely will get censored. However, there are specific avenues which you can go down if you do have a problem with society. Actually, we made a video on this last year in Beijing where we went to a call center and we learned a little bit behind the scenes of how this takes place. I won't go into all of that right now, but I'll link it down in the description and the video in the corner here. So after you've watched this one, check it out. But you are able to actually make a difference. You know, if they get several calls in, I don't know, X amount of time, then they will address an issue that is being put forth. Chinese people really have a different definition of freedom. Now, they see freedom as the ability to walk around in the cities at 12 o'clock at night and not be disturbed. Freedom to Chinese people is the ability to move around the country fairly inexpensively. That's because the Chinese government builds the infrastructure and keeps the prices down so that people are able to do that. It's not just left to private companies to try and fill the pockets of the shareholders and make as much money as they can. Before I came here, I honestly didn't understand how freedom could be perceived any differently to where it is in my country. You don't get to see it through a different lens until you are an international citizen and you see it from these other points of view. I think it's a really valuable experience. One of the first days I was ever in China, I had a very eye-opening experience, and it was fairly trivial now that I've been here for 2 years. There's a fly in my face. But when I first came here, it was very eye-opening. And I was walking around my neighborhood at about, I don't know, midnight, 1 a.m. on my own, just, you know, taking in the surroundings. And I noticed just in front of me, there was probably a 15 or 16-year-old girl just walking by herself on her phone, you know, dawdling through the streets like nothing was, you know, a potential risk. And I just thought to myself, like, I don't remember ever seeing that back home. And I only lived in a small hometown, you know, a small village, and in my nearby town I wouldn't even see young girls doing that. And that just goes to show like the level of safety that is in Chinese cities, you know. Now, I'm not going to say that literally every time you walk around at midnight in the UK you're going to get robbed or stabbed. That's definitely not the case. You know, there are a lot of safe areas, but you could get caught in the wrong area at the wrong time and something bad could happen. I would say overall, generally speaking, Chinese cities are incredibly safe in comparison. Now, that's a freedom you have in China that you don't have in many other countries around the world. And one of the main reasons for that is because of the amount of security cameras that they have around. That is a deterrent to criminal activity. As well as that, the punishments are extremely severe if you are caught doing a crime. So again, that acts as a pretty big deterrent. Now, playing devil's advocate, you could say that that's a terrible thing because the government are watching your every move, or are able to watch your every move. But if you just think about it logically, right? The government don't have the resources or the ability to track 1.4 billion people. Why would they even want to? Why would they need to? The reason they're there is so they can catch people committing crimes, right? So if you're not committing crime, you haven't really got anything to worry about. Now that brings me on to another point. Chinese people in general are extremely willing to give up some privacy in return for convenience. Now this is super evident in the introduction of WeChat and Alipay, where they use digital payment, QR codes, all the data is fed into one app, they use face scanning, and it does alleviate a lot of traffic problems in China in a metaphorical sense. It makes the average day of an average citizen so much more convenient. Now, someone from the UK or the US, for example, might then say, well, if they're using these apps for everything, then these companies have so much data in so many different areas about this person, and the government is tied in with the companies, so that means the government have this data, and they're going to use it for this and that, and these terrible things, which is again probably not the case. Someone's just dropped their phone. Oh dear. And my counter argument to that would be that, yeah, that is the case. They will be harvesting an insane amount of data, and I'm sure if the government wanted to, they could get access to that data. But I think that's just more apparent. Everybody knows that. So, and everybody's willing to give up that data in return for convenience. Whereas in the West, we plug in all of our data pretty much voluntarily into these social media sites, and they have an insane amount of data on us. I mean, you just need to watch a documentary called The Social Dilemma, and that will really give you an incredible insight into how much data they really harvest from us. I think from a Chinese perspective, they've seen their country flourish in vibrant colors over the past 40 years. Since opening up slightly, their country has gone from, a very poor country to one of the leading powerhouses in the entire world. That is the fastest development in human history. So to not acknowledge that is naive and ignorant. And I think to tell Chinese people that their way is not how it should be, I think is just never going to go down the right way. It's just about understanding of each other's cultures. At the end of the day, the systems work for their respective countries. And I don't think it's for the West to interfere with China's. I don't think it's for China to interfere with the West's. I think they work in their own countries. That's how they should be. It's not going to change. And it's up to us as individuals to understand more about each other's cultures and sort of just become a more international citizen, and not just be somebody who criticizes from in their mum's basement, who's never actually been to a place, because that's just not helping anything or anyone. Now, if we try to learn about one another's countries and we try to understand and accept the differences, we can have a better relationship, and that will literally benefit everybody in the entire world. We can start tackling big problems that everybody's dealing with on this planet. How good would that be in an ideal world? Anyway, that's going to bring me to the end of this video. I want to know what you think down in the comments. Please do start a discussion down there and I'll read them all. And we will see you in the next one. For now, take care.